Hello and welcome back. This is going to be chapter 23. This is persuasion and mobilization efforts by parties and candidates. I think this is a particularly important chapter because it's very real world, right? Most people think about politics, think about campaigns, mobilization, get out the vote efforts, things like that. This is a pretty good chapter. We'll spend a little bit of time on this one. We start out with the idea that the book so far and most sort of researchers are quite skeptical or pessimistic about the effects of campaigns, right? And so it sort of leads to two questions. The first is, why should campaigns matter or not? The second is, what influences the effectiveness of a campaign, right? If they do matter, sometimes, what makes them matter more or less, or what makes them more efficacious? And so we'll talk about that in the latter half. But the first, we'll start with why campaigns either matter or do not. There are a lot of different sort of theories about this. There are a number of people who say that campaigns simply don't matter, right? So if you look at Campbell's American Voter, Campbell would say, campaigns don't really matter. People are already sort of stuck in their ideological perspective and their socio-demographic characteristics. And so campaigns shouldn't really matter at all, right? If you look at the sort of rational choice perspective from V.O. Key, he would suggest that campaigns aren't all that important, right? And that what's important is voters' perceptions of the party in power's effectiveness as a governor, right? This is usually taken from sort of a, how are you doing economically, and how that affects the sort of vote outcome. But again, Key and the rational choice theory would say that maybe you sort of boost information and reduce the cost of voting in some small sense, but you're not really going to have much of an effect. Later on, you have Fiorina and others who say that it's all about economic performance. If you're either going to reward or punish the incumbent government based on their economic performance, because Fiorina and many of those like him suggest that economics is the end-all be-all for deciding voters' political decisions. And then you have Lazarsfeld from really, really early on in research, who suggests that campaigns, basically all they do is reinforce voters' already existing ideological perspective, right? On the other hand, you have those who suggest that campaigns do matter. Some suggest that, look, why are you discounting reinforcement? Reinforcement is just as important to sort of getting out the vote and voter turnout as is flipping candidates. So some also suggest that, of course, ideological attachment to parties is sort of dying across the Western world. And so as ideological attachment dies out, you get a whole lot more sort of undecided and unattached voters. And so campaigns become particularly important, especially really close to the election. A lot of research is finding that socio-demographic data, we talked about sort of religious cleavages and class cleavages sort of being on the decline, and the more that those sort of things are on the decline, the more that campaigns should matter. Let's see. Okay, and so some suggest that, and research has found that money actually does matter, right? Campaign spending does affect get out the vote and voter turnout, and voting for a particular party or another. We also find that when we're looking at money and how it affects or influences sort of voter turnout, um, expenditures tend to be more effective for challengers, not incumbents, right? Incumbents have probably already had such a great informational head start. But challengers can use their money to increase sort of name recognition, increase information about their platforms. And we also find that challengers this tends to be most influential not only for challengers, but for challengers in single member districts. So then we'll move on to, let's see, district effects. If we're looking at national versus district elections, we do find that sort of personal contact does tend to mobilize people much more than sort of leafleting or phone calling, things like that. Actual door knocking tends to sort of put boots on the ground. Research also tends to find that sort of the context of the election is important. The closer the election, the more likely the campaigns are to matter for things like voter turnout or voter decision. All right, so we'll move on to, under what conditions will parties be more effective, right? And they introduce research by Fisher et al., who lay out 4 contexts for determining sort of the effectiveness of campaigns. One is the closest of the election, which research has supported. The second is the likelihood of the election supporting a change in government, and that campaign effects here tend to be biggest for the challenger when the population wants to move away from the status quo, and sort of challenge the political system as is. Campaigns tend to be more effective for challengers in close districts. Challengers where there's a chance of overthrowing sort of the party in charge. Another is the effectiveness of targeting that occurs. The idea here is that if you're more sort of parsimonious in how you spend your money, you're more likely to have better effects. So if you target fewer districts, your campaign should be more effective. And then the final one is the level of clarity on the objectives of the party. I'll let you guys read about that. So what types of campaigns do matter? They split out traditional, modern, and sort of e-campaigning into different categories. Traditional campaigning is things like leafleting, door knocking, get out the vote. I'll give you a ride to the election if you need it, that sort of thing. This tends to be pretty efficacious, especially like we talked about earlier, sort of door knocking. There's been a lot of research by some guys named Gerber and Green out of Yale University who studied this sort of thing, and they find that personal contact tends to be really highly efficacious. The modern category includes things like phone calls and the construction, maintenance, and usage of political databases. And then you have e-campaigning like emails, internet, social media, all of that stuff. So that's going to call it for this chapter, which was chapter 23. We have 3 chapters left in the semester. So I will see you for the next one. Have a great day.